Welcome, everybody, to the Building AI Readiness workshop for preparing for new technology. We decided that we needed to host yet one more AI workshop just so that we could, now that we've kind of gotten people off the ledge a little bit, we want to encourage them to start putting this new tool into practice in a different way. And so we've kind of created a space where, well, you'll see. That's just a teaser. I'll let you. We'll talk about what we're actually going to do in a second. Basically, what we're looking at doing for this workshop. And let me pause and introduce us. We've got Emily Rush. I'm Peg Checky, Laura Smith, and Daniel Martin, all here, and we all collaborated on this workshop because it really is such a big topic that it takes at least 4 people to harness the information that we're harnessing. It's never ending, and it's such a deep, rich topic that's covering all of technology at the moment and all of education at the moment. So anyway, we're happy to be here to present. And our learning objectives for today, just like I said, are a little bit different than they have been in the past, in that we want to apply futures thinking to visualize multiple trajectories for AI. Now, futures thinking, for those of you that don't know, is just, I'll let Emily explain it. I'm not going to jump ahead, I promised. So we're going to talk about futures thinking. We're going to conduct a SWOT analysis to assess the risks and benefits of AI implementation. Because, even though it's perceived as a threat by many people, there are a lot of opportunities and strengths as well. And then we want to develop a personalized action plan. We want to go away with a tool that we can use to actually figure out how this is going to impact us and what we can do with it to create our own future, as opposed to being reactionary and just, letting it happen. And so that personalized action plan is going to focus on AI readiness and opportunity realization. And so with that said, I'd like to talk a little bit about the state of AI currently and where we are. And, that's as of this minute. And actually, this slide is from last week, so it's already out of date. But essentially, if you've been paying attention at all, and how many of you, just show of hands, how many of you have been paying attention to the world of AI that are here today? Just give me a quick thumbs up or a... Yeah, it looks like a fair amount of you. And how many of you are just checking into AI for the very first time? Anybody? Okay, so it looks like everybody in the room has at least heard of the term AI and know what we're talking about. So it's advancing so rapidly. It only came about a year ago this month, or next month, right? So it's not even a year old, this technology. I say that with there were some beginnings of it in search engines, Siri and Alexa. Those were kind of the beginnings of it. But now it's basically in every single industry now. Education is a primary source of it. It has the power to create text from images and images from text. That's new. You can have a voice conversation with it. They've given it a voice and multiple voices because it actually has multiple personalities in some applications. So that's a little bit disturbing. There's the possibility now to integrate data from different sources in the retrieval augmented generation, or RAG systems. I haven't even looked at those yet. I've just heard of them. And then, of course, you can do photo and video backgrounds and generate photos from text and, write a paper, have the generative AI read the paper and have it create a photo that will represent the paper for you. And the photo is going to be pretty darn good. And finally, of course, the other thing that's really taken off in tandem is the ethical considerations. And oh my God, the sky is falling. Everybody's going to cheat. Nobody's going to learn anything anywhere ever, because why would they if they have AI? And we've kind of come to the conclusion that that's not how students are going to use it. And we can discuss that at length and more as you wish. And then finally, I like to put this little tag on there because I am from Vermont and hopelessly green. Vermont was green before green was cool, by the way. Just going to throw that plug in there. But there is an environmental impact with generative AI in that it takes a tremendous amount of power and resources to be able to run the servers and answer these queries. I think, Emily, you told me the other day it was a half a liter of water per query that's used.
Yeah.
And I regularly generate 10 or 15 or 20 or 100 queries in a day. So I'm just draining the reservoirs everywhere. A little disturbing when you think about that. So anyway, that's where we are today, but we're not going to stay there because we want to talk about the future. And so to that, I pass to Emily, who's going to introduce futures thinking to us.
Thanks, Peg. So as Peg sort of set up in her introduction to our workshop, in previous workshops, we've really focused on specific skills like acclimating you all to certain AI tools. We've talked about things like AI literacy and specific capabilities like prompt engineering. But today we're going to take a little bit of different approach to AI, and we're going to do that through the lens of something called futures thinking. And if it sounds really far out and wacky or like something from Star Trek, I ask you to just bear with us a little bit and hopefully it will make sense. Um, so, futures thinking, as we note on the slide, is essentially a framework for thinking about possible futures and alternative scenarios. And we use that to inform present day decisions. What this does in terms of futures thinking is it asks us to challenge our present assumptions about what is fixed and what is variable. It also asks us to widen our perspectives, to think critically and creatively, and identify trends and patterns, and map out scenarios of what could be. And we'll try to do some of that today. And I do want to emphasize that futures thinking is not about predicting the future. Rather, it's about exploring different possibilities for informed decision making. And so today, we're going to use some activities based on the field of futures thinking to envision different possibilities with regard to AI. And then we're going to return to those possibilities to try and give you all a greater sense of autonomy and empowerment in the face of the uncertainty that is AI today. All right, so you might ask, why would I want to do this? And in fact, there's a number of benefits to futures thinking. One I think of the most important is that by engaging in this type of approach, we can try to minimize the psychological risk of uncertainty. And for a lot of us, there is a lot of risk of uncertainty with AI. Even as an instructional designer, I'm really excited about AI, but there is some voice in the back of my head saying, holy cow, AI can write really good learning objectives. It can do things that I do, and that's really scary. So I think for all of us, futures thinking can help us navigate a world that is described as VUCA, this great acronym for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so our goal today is to help you get to a place or move from a position of, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to watch and wait, and instead get to this place in which we say, here's an opportunity. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to try something. And this is a quote that I love from David Cropley, who is a noted futurist, so actually an expert in futures thinking. All right, now I'm going to ask you to bear with me just for a moment for an activity that will prime us for our future activities. It's a little bit experimental, and so if you would like to mute your camera just for a minute while we do it, that's perfectly fine. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a few minutes to ease our way into futures thinking through mental time travel. And if you're stifling a laugh, that's okay. Just bear with me. So what I want you to do for this very brief activity, I promise it will take about 2 minutes tops. So I want you to imagine yourself waking up tomorrow. And as you're doing this, try to picture it as vividly as possible. You might think about what space or room you're in. How do you wake up? Is it from an alarm or someone else in your household? Is it light or dark? What side of the bed you're on? And maybe continue with this imagination just for a few minutes until you can have a clear mental picture. Now, okay, we'll return to the present for a minute. hopefully that first trip to the future wasn't terribly difficult because that trip was to a highly imaginable future, right? So if we think about tomorrow, there's a little bit of risk of uncertainty. Will I dump my coffee on myself as I'm leaving the house, or, something like that? But generally, we can sort of predict what might happen. So let's try this one more time, again, just for about 60 seconds. I don't want to tie up the workshop. And let's try doing that same exercise, but let's vividly imagine yourself waking up 1 year from now. Now, again, try to envision your environment as clearly as possible. And as you're doing that, think about, are the details from the first scene similar, or are they really different? Are there different experiences that you anticipate a year from now? Or do you perhaps have new habits? And as you're reflecting on that, maybe just don't question. If you want to include it in the chat, you're welcome to. If you just want to reflect, I guess the question I would ask you is, were you inclined to envision a future that's similar today, or is it different? And there is no right or wrong answer. It's just how you think about the future. Okay, and now we'll move back into the realm of the workshop. Thank you for participating in that activity. What we just did was something called episodic futures thinking. And if any of you have read Jane McGonigal's excellent book, Imaginable, she talks about this as mental time travel. And this is essentially brief moments in which we vividly imagine the future. And when we do this, especially if we engage in it on a semi-regular basis, we can start to undergo a subtle shift in perception. And as we'll sort of discuss later, when we start to think about longer time spans, like a year or even longer, scientists have noted that, for example, our brains start to think about the future in a different way. And we actually undergo a shift in perspective from a first person kind of perspective to a more distant, more neutral third person perspective. And so we'll tap into a little of that today. A second aspect of this futures thinking is the idea of, if we can experience episodic futures thinking, we can, in a sense, pre-feel different possible futures. And by doing so, we can mitigate feelings of shock or anxiety to more of feelings of pre-recognition or familiarity. So we can make the future a little less scary. Accordingly, scientists have noted that if we do this on a semi-regular basis or regular basis, futures thinking can lead to greater creativity, more adaptability, critical thinking, resilience. And I always feel terrible talking to healthcare providers and clinicians about resilience. I know you've already built up a lot, but this is another way to do that, and also problem-solving skills. All right, so in today's workshop, we're going to draw on the 3 components of futures thinking listed below. So we're going to start by thinking about diverse, plausible futures. We've already done that a little bit. We're then going to analyze the present in light of possible futures. And then thirdly, we'll try to align decisions today to a desired future. Now, as we go through this, I just want to say that if you find yourself lost, please feel free to unmute yourself or message one of the moderators. And again, thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Daniel and Laura.
All right, thank you, Emily and Peg. This is Daniel, or this is Laura, and then we also have Daniel here. We're going to move on to our first activity for the day. So hopefully you all can hear me, and I apologize for not turning on my webcam. I'm having some connection issues, so I'm going to keep that turned off so I don't lose the connection. But now that Emily has presented you with this really interesting concept of futures thinking, and so you've begun to imagine what the near future might look like, as well as sort of begun to examine your reactions to it, we're going to engage in an activity where we imagine a more distant future. So now this activity will present you with a hypothetical scenario on what higher education might look like in the year 2030 if generative AI were to continue to develop at its current pace. And so the purpose of this activity, as you can see on the slide, is to apply futures thinking toward a critical assessment of generative AI and its potential impact on higher education. And so to do this, we're going to engage in a SWOT analysis. And I'm sure most, if not all of you, have done this before in your professional lives. SWOT stands for, as you can see here, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And as you probably already know, SWOT is a very useful way of addressing a challenge or opportunity from multiple perspectives in order to be informed about its potential risks and benefits and to help you make, in order to help you to make a decision about how to move forward. So for this activity, we'll be adapting and slightly adjusting that SWOT framework toward a critical evaluation of generative AI and its potential existence in the future. So rather than maintain that usual distinction between internal and external forces that you typically see in a SWOT, you're going to be applying this framework toward AI as a whole. And so like in SWOT, like in typical SWOT analysis, strengths and weaknesses are known issues or known factors, whereas opportunities and threats would be those unknowns, what might happen as a result of these factors. So as Emily and Peg have been saying, since this new thing called generative AI is so new and can be very overwhelming and somewhat scary, our hope is that SWOT will provide us with a ready-made framework to kind of objectively examine these new tools from every possible angle so that we can together begin developing an action roadmap for the future. So this takes us to our scenario. So I should, before Daniel is going to read it for us, if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide, I should give a disclaimer that the scenario was co-written by the city team and generative AI tools, both Claude and ChatGPT. So again, the scenario presents a hypothetical, but a highly plausible world if AI were to continue to advance at its current pace and be embraced by educators and administrators. So Daniel, if you want to lead us into the scenario.
Sure. It's the year 2030, and the landscape of healthcare education has been transformed by artificial intelligence. You're a university professor teaching at a top-tier academic medical center. You and your colleagues have learned to leverage AI for a variety of tasks, from personalized and inclusive learning to assessment to increased teaching productivity. As a result of long-term AI exposure, your students are achieving learning milestones at a faster rate than ever before. In your classroom, you observe your students undertaking immersive simulations enabled by advanced AI technology. They interact with intelligent avatars, playing patients and staff through their VR virtual reality headsets. The AI exposes them to a vast range of scenarios to build clinical competency and improve interpersonal skills. An AI teaching assistant keeps you informed of each student's progress. It adapts the lessons to match their individual strengths, weaknesses, and preferences in real time. The AI answers their questions while identifying and filling knowledge gaps. You actively use AI to develop lesson plans, automate repetitive tasks, and generate analytics on your students' performance. Your expertise helps interpret these AI insights. You utilize an auto-grading system for exams and assignments, which provides instant feedback and adaptive questions to students based on their progress. Grading happens automatically in the background, freeing up time for higher value teaching.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. So now that we've read through the scenario, I would love it if everyone would open the guide that we've provided for you in the chat. It is a Google Doc. So if you would take a moment to open it, we'll pause for a moment to be sure everyone's ready to move forward before we continue. If you have any issues, please don't hesitate to raise your hand, reach out, post in the chat. Okay. So hopefully everyone has that open now. I see at least 10 viewers in there. So it looks like everyone's been able, since I haven't heard differently, able to access that. So Emily, if you would move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is the worksheet or the guide we're going to be using for the SWOT. So in this guide, along with the same scenario you've been presented, along with the same scenario, you've presented with a question, which we'll use to guide your SWOT. And that question reads, what is your perception of the risks and benefits to healthcare education in this scenario? So what we'd like you to do is to use the editable SWOT matrix that you see in that guide to begin completing it to the best of your own ability. You feel free to jump around. You don't have to do it in any particular order. There's no real right answer here. We would just love for you to, to take a moment to reflect and enter your thoughts about what you perceive to be those strengths and weaknesses, these known factors, and then the opportunities and threats, or these unknowns posed by this imagined future. So Emily, I think were we going to project the matrix so we could see it populating in real time? We'll take several minutes, or we'll see how it goes, just to see how you all are advancing in it. If you don't know, it's okay to say that too. Again, there are no wrong answers. So please have at it and let us know if there are questions.
We're going to go until the popcorn stops popping. Is that how you described it, Laura?
Yeah, I think so.
I think we need to turn up the heat a little bit.
If you need to read back through that scenario, it's also in that guide, same scenario, just above the matrix. So you can look back at that to begin sort of gathering your thoughts and developing some responses. We thought while you continue to populate the matrix, if you would like to verbally share or expand on any of the responses or noteworthy responses of others, we'd love to hear more about what you added. Thank you. Yeah, and feel free to elaborate in writing in the matrix too. You don't have to verbally share if you
absolutely
want to.
That's actually a really good point with the expense of it, because as someone else noted, there is still a digital divide, and there probably always will be. Some people have access to all the best tech and all the best toys, and other people are still using, Acers from 2009 because that's all they can get their hands on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's a problem.
Yeah, equity is definitely a concern. So we're seeing in terms of strengths, we're seeing a lot of emphasis on efficiency, productivity. Individualized instruction seems to be a common response. And access to information, whether it be scenarios, content. In terms of weaknesses, Daniel, if you wanted to jump in, please feel free.
Sure. Again, in things I certainly hadn't thought about myself, but looking at group work and the impact that would have if individual students are going to be progressing at different rates, and how would AI impact their ability to work as a group. That struck me as really a really interesting observation.
I was struck, Laura, by how people gravitated first towards the strengths and opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of expected the opposite, honestly, and I don't know what that says about me. I guess I'm in kind of a negative place myself right now. But weaknesses and threats I'm always the first one to jump on the weaknesses and threats. Like I always see those first, and then I come around to the strengths and opportunities. So it's really refreshing to see a group of people that's doing the opposite. I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and our opportunities, we see again that emphasis on efficiency, more research opportunities, accommodations for students, just being able to manage one's job a little bit more efficiently. And then threats, and there are, important threats worth noting, right? Whether it's not, it's, job security, students potentially having challenges coming up with differential diagnosis, perhaps that influencing their, just their day-to-day interactions with patients. And so a lot of potential threats as well. Does anyone want to expand on any one of these further before we move on to our last question here?
There's a really interesting juxtaposition on the left under opportunities. It talks about increasing the university's bottom line because the content becomes more manageable. Thus, we can take in more students. Thus, we can increase the university's bottom line. And then the exact opposite of that, if the coursework is more efficient, could the programs be shortened, thus negatively impacting the university's bottom line? Never crossed my mind on that one. So kudos to the people who wrote those.
Yeah, that was something, if whoever contributed that would like to elaborate, that is a really interesting idea that I don't think any of us have discussed at all as a team, at least not to my knowledge. But I'm glad, Peg, that you mentioned that, because I think our next, we wanted to take, before we move on to the third part of our workshop, was to begin sort of to draw some connections here and specifically look for, identifying an opportunity when looking or considering a weakness or a threat. So, for example, if you replied that a loss of human-to-human interaction between, provider and patient is a potential threat, can we identify a strength of AI that could be used to mitigate that threat, for example? Does anyone have any thoughts about that and how, again, we can use strengths and opportunities to mitigate threats?
So I'll prime the pump.
Okay.
But one of the things I thought of is that while AI has the potential to take away from the human contact, it also might give patients more confidence because they're not like, I know when I go to the doctor, sometimes I don't want to tell them all the things that I'm really really doing or really thinking, or, what is it that House used to say? Everybody lies. And so if I'm dealing with an AI, there's really no point in lying. And plus I know that there's no judgment. Whereas with human beings, I fear judgment. Mm-hmm. So that might be the counterpoint to that.
Or perhaps this is a good point. I don't know, for the sake of time, to sort of carry your observations and ideas, benefits and threats, all of that, to our next activity, because we're going to put them to use. Does that make sense? So feel free to keep this guide open. It is yours to take with and do with and refer back to. But we'll go ahead and then move on to our third part. Again, feel free to put questions in the chat or interrupt us should you have them.
All right, so we're going to transition to our next activity, which is also rooted in futures thinking. But first of all, I'd like to thank you for participating in that excellent SWOT analysis. It was really great to get your perspectives and hear really diverse perspectives. It's really valuable for us, and hopefully you found it valuable to hear or to see what your colleagues are thinking as well. So for our next futures thinking activity, what we're going to do is to develop an action roadmap. So this is our opportunity to think about those risks or threats and think about how we can turn them into an opportunity and how we can do that in a way that maybe we can have a little more control, in a sense, over our future. Oh, pardon me. I don't know what happened there. just jumped ahead. Okay, so all right, what we're going to do now is to build an action roadmap. And this is just another futures thinking activity that may be helpful in achieving your goals. So we're going to take another time trip to the future. We're going to return to the year 2030. And after we have set up the activity, and I'm going to go through a brief example, we'll move you into small groups in which you can brainstorm and think about what is your ideal vision of the future in terms of higher education for 2030. And as we do this, we're going to give you a tool to help you capture that information in your thoughts. And so I'll show that in just a minute, but you'll start on the right side of the tool and you'll describe your vision of the future along with goals and elements of that preferred future, keeping in mind that since we're focusing on AI, and it's highly likely that AI will be part of that future, you're encouraged to work that into your preferred future, even if and really that's not part of your preferred future. From then, we're going to use a process called backcasting, in which you describe short, medium, and long-term actions or goals that would help you achieve that future. And you might consider as part of each step designating who's responsible for that or what kind of resources are needed. Right, so this is the tool that we're going to give you in a minute, the action roadmap. So as I said, once you get it, you'll start on the right and describe your preferred future. And then I think in a perfect world, maybe you would work from right to left. A couple of us have worked through this on our own, and we found that we could certainly start on the right, but then we just needed to work through it in whatever way was most appropriate to us. So there's no one right way to do it. I started here and then I had to start in the short term and work back to the long term. And I'm going to take a minute and just give you an example of this is my action roadmap as an instructional designer. And so as I was reflecting about my ideal future or preferred future, in the year 2030, I envisioned that maybe I would be in my role, but I would work with AI assistants that might help with basic tasks. This would free up time so I could really delve into educational developments and help faculty with, up-to-date scholarship and practices. But because I value human relationships, that a human-centric approach would be central to my work. From there, I outlined various goals and milestones to sort of break that down over the short term, midterm, and long term. Right. So you can do sort of any version of this that works well for you. Are there any questions before we give you the action roadmap and have you move into breakout rooms? Okay, so this is the action roadmap. If you all don't mind, I'm also going to pop a version of it in the chat just in case people want more of a document, but it will be available in the breakout room as well.
Yeah. Any questions before we go? All right, I'm opening the room. See you in a little bit. We're gonna make sure you have access to the tool on the whiteboard, and then we're gonna disappear so that you guys can talk amongst yourselves.
How's it going? Okay. Yeah, they
were
seem
fine.
like.
But I'm glad you guys were all able to stay, because this is the fun part. This is the part where we get to talk about things. So, but what we did want to talk about was, how did that exercise help, or did it help? Did it shift your perspectives at all? Slow down. And then we wanted hopefully to get at least one of you to share your roadmap with the group and kind of talk about what you learned.
So we can share if you want, but we were at kind of a little bit of a loss to figure out how we envision these long-term, short-term, and midterm things. What we did come up with, we definitely had 6 points or maybe even more as to what our preferred future looked like.
Yeah, if you don't mind sharing that would be great, Chris. We'll start there at least.
Yeah, sure. So maybe it would just prompt discussion here. So my apologies, our apologies for not bringing this further, but it's not, AI doesn't change our primary objectives here. Our primary objectives are to have engaged students. We want empathetic providers, since we're teaching healthcare providers here. We want our students to be able to learn in an enjoyable atmosphere. So that might actually tie directly back into AI. We want them to have the long-term knowledge. We obviously still want them to learn. Not always about the process, although we want to think it is. Ultimately, at the end of the day, they need some knowledge. And to be able to apply that knowledge, especially being in healthcare, they need to be able to take that knowledge. If they get it through AI, or if there's, indirectly through AI, either way, they still need to be able to be proficient practitioners. And within their training, we still we're having some problems with being able to control the student learning when they go off of campus, and they have their kind of experiential learning processes, like if they go to the clinic. So we want to be able to try to control the quality and the experiences that they're having. So when it came to figuring the rest of this out, so in trying to figure out these short-term, midterm, and long-term, we were a bit at a loss of figuring out like what kind of easier and harder activities with respect to these kind of broader ideas.
Yeah, it was easy for us to figure out what we wanted, but how to get there.
That's interesting. Was that across the board?
Which AI are you going to use or expect your students to use? Should the university choose a format? That's what
or should we build our own, right? Because there are now HIPAA compliant AIs, and individual corporations are building their own AIs based on what their needs are, and they're training them on their language subsets. And so, and they are HIPAA compliant, and they're internal to the organization. So is that something that we would want to think about as, would that be something that Rush should be looking towards?
It seems like with certification and, healthcare, that I think the world has to come to a consensus on how to treat patients to make sure that we all are following a format that's followable, not something that's so abstract.
Right. And we were talking about that while you guys were working. We were talking about the abstractness of this whole workshop really is based on the abstract, right? And it's really challenging for people to think in the abstract when they don't have a basis, a foundational basis to jump from. The same thing applies to students, right? We need to make sure that their foundations are solid and strong so that they can make these leaps into more theoretical and abstract thinking.
Well, the university would have to choose the AI then, because we can't be experts in everything that's out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll just jump in. One of the things I had commented on is that the university as a whole really needs to get on board with this. That, right now it's all of us individual faculty members in our various programs with our various students that are reading about it, learning about it, trying to figure it out, doing all those things. It would be helpful if the university as a whole, kind of helped put some guardrails or guide us, or not necessarily guardrails, I don't want to say that, but, kind of give some guidance to some of this stuff too, so that we don't, I just feel like we're very fragmented on how we're all going about it and approaching it and things, not to give away academic freedom, but, I just feel like maybe the upper administration isn't paying attention to this as much as faculty are paying attention to it. Chris, you have your hand up. I'm sorry.
Paula, I have a question for you. I mean, I've thought that as well. But then a lot of me thinks, well, are we all going through this learning curve? And what I mean by all, I mean every university, every instructor, every student. I feel like we're just in the very, very, very beginnings of all of this, just the basic genesis of it all, that we don't know. We don't know what it's going to be like tomorrow. So it's hard for us to pour so much resource, just mental, cognition into this until we actually know what it's going to look like down the road. Thus this forum right here to just exchange ideas as to what this is meaning in our life.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would like to see some of these, I'd like to see some administration in some of these workshops, I guess.
Hmm.
That
Interesting.
just because I feel, this is me, that they aren't paying as much attention to all of this because they're not in the classrooms teaching like we
Right.
all are. And so they're a little bit removed, not necessarily in a bad way, but they're a little bit more removed. So it would be helpful if sometimes some of the administrators would come to some of these workshops to understand what faculty are feeling and thinking and going through and questioning and our own concerns and things like that about AI, just so they're aware of what's happening. I'm not sure
I
they're as
really
much aware of what's happening within our university as they may be when they read articles about how it's impacting all universities, you know?
right. I really
If
like
I,
what Laura put in the chat. She suggested that an institutional support would be a key short-term milestone necessary for moving forward. So in actual fact, you've just identified a good milestone. Let's get some institutional leaders into our next workshop. And that's something that we could invite them. We can't guarantee that they'll come, but we could certainly invite them.
Yeah. And choose one or two AI formats that we put in the syllabus so that we get comfortable with at least one and everybody knows it. Because if we're out for a free-for-all, everyone's going to use a different one.
Right, exactly.
And I think in our breakout session, I think it was either Erica or Kathy, and I apologize, I don't know which one, brought up the issue of outcomes. Is there a way to measure the learning with AI versus when students didn't have AI? So is it better? Is it using AI truly better? Are there outcomes? And how do we measure those outcomes with our students? So I thought that was a really good point too.
That actually, Paul, that was me who was talking about that, because, it's one thing to be able to say that we can guarantee that they're going to, and predict that they're going to pass their NCLEX or that they're going to pass their certification exam or their medical boards or whatever it is. But it's another thing to be able to know that they're able to, that the things that those tests don't measure are also happening, that they have good communication skills and that they are able to critically think and that they're able to, competently perform certain kinds of tasks and that they're able to write. So those things aren't measured by those exams they take.
And that's an interesting point too. Paula, do you want to speak to that a little bit on terms of how you're using it in the writing class?
Well, I did speak to that in our breakout room a little bit.
Oh, okay.
And just that my students don't want to use AI. And so I've had to introduce them to how to use AI. So as I'm learning it, I'm learning it with my students because I don't know how to use it either. So, I use it with them. But I've had to put it into assignments and things like that so they learn how to use it appropriately, right? Trying to get a hold of that, ahead of that curve so that I don't have a bunch of students using it and then they're coming up with garbage. But one of the things I also mentioned is that if it wasn't for the support and the resources we have through the instructional designers and through City, I mean, I can't imagine going through this huge shift in education without some level of resources and support as healthcare instructors, because again, none of us were really trained as educators. And so,
Oh, yeah. That's a really great point. I've been sort of on this soapbox about our CTEI and what they're doing for us. But outside of this forum, I have had zero conversations about AI with anybody. I haven't been in any other forums. I haven't been invited to any other forums. I haven't heard it come up other than maybe a departmental meeting, a little, 30-second discussion on it. But this seems to be the only forum, at least in my experience, where we're having this conversation. And you're right. If we didn't have this, I would be completely in the dark.
I think a lot of us would be. I mean, and the other thing to remember, a lot of what I've been reading suggests that that education is outpacing the medical field when it comes to AI. And so education is already, they're using it here, there, and everywhere, whereas the medical field is using it in a different way. They're using it, but in a different way entirely. And so we have to, we as the healthcare educators of the future need to be able to bring in that element more, the educational element more, and really start looking at some of those, not just medical journal articles, but educational journal articles, so that you can kind of get that educational perspective, and how are they using it, and why are they using it, and what is it doing for them. The first time I tried writing a learning objective with AI, I was like, well, that just made my job easier. And then my second thought was, well, they can do that? What else can they do that's my job? So yeah, I think it's really important, I think, to, as we've been discussing, to sort of point out that you just came up with a bunch of milestones, right? You've just applied future thinking and applied milestones that you want to achieve. And so I would encourage all of you to, we can invite people to meetings, but be the ones banging on the drum in your departments and with your peers to get everybody on board with what we're doing here. And because Rush has the potential, we're already ahead of the curve. And I think a lot of that is due to Emily and Laura and Daniel and others on the team, really digging in to find out, how is this going to impact us? Rush is ahead of the curve, I feel. We already have an AI module that we're giving to students. We already have resources that we're giving to faculty. So, if we can get our faculty and our administration to jump onto the bandwagon and propel us forward even further, that can't do anything but help us. Other thoughts? Emily, do you want to take us home?
Sure. Yeah, let me just bring up. So I wanted to, first of all, thank you all again for joining us. There are just a few things I wanted to do to wrap up. And starting by directing your attention back to that scenario that Laura and Daniel walked you through. At the end of that scenario, I encourage you all to take a look at some additional questions that you might consider individually, or perhaps with your colleagues or in your department. They're maybe a little less abstract and more thinking about what are some current challenges, exactly the kinds of questions that you were just suggesting. What are obstacles? What do you need to be more knowledgeable? So these are also questions that might help you work through where you're encountering stumbling blocks with AI. All right, so now I just wanted to sort of bring our workshop to the close. I especially want to thank you for participating in this format, which is quite different than other things that we've tried. And if you've liked that Futures Thinking Perspectives, some other things that you can also continue doing, these are Futures Thinking approaches, is first of all, you can, now that you're more aware, you can start looking for signals of change with regard to AI in education. Maybe looking at, are there medical or health science programs that have AI initiatives? I researched a few. University of Minnesota has an ethics of AI nursing that they just announced this summer. Harvard is one of many schools that has medicine and AI and medicine PhD tracks. So basically, as you become more aware, you can start looking at perceptible shifts in attitudes amongst organizations and in higher education. And the other thing that City will also work to help you be aware of is, what are the drivers of these changes? So it started a lot with ChatGPT last November. As Paula Jo has mentioned, there are increasingly more tools like Elicit, Semantic Scholar, and Research Rabbit that are maybe impacting how people do research. And pretty soon, there will probably be domain-specific LLMs. Google is already developing one for the field of medicine. So these are all things that will probably further drive that change that maybe would impact what 2030 looks like in education. Just a couple other things. We also have several upcoming workshops, so we can see who we can get to attend. We have a faculty forum on November 7th. We have a workshop on November 15th on integrating AI into writing. We have something that's not on AI with authentic assessments. And then we'll be in the week of December 11th, we'll be returning to AI essentials or foundations. We'll keep you all posted on that date, but that's a good chance if you're newer to AI or just want a refresher, maybe you haven't used it for a while, that's a great workshop to get to attend. If you have a moment, we'd really appreciate your feedback on how you thought this workshop went. And I think some of us or all of us are available to hang out in case you have any questions or want to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I just really appreciate everybody's time. This was really, really helpful for us too, to see where you guys are thinking and where you guys want to go with all of this. It's you know, we're on the forefront. This truly is an inflection point, much like the printing press and the development of the internet itself, I think.